Hello there. In this lesson I'm going to show you how you can modify the YSL pendant and give it a kind of different appearance. As you can see in this screenshot here, the S and the L, I've rotated them, and the L, as you can see, is a little bit larger. So I'm going to show you how you can do that in Fluid Designer. So if we assume that you've just followed lesson 1 and you've got YSL with the brush script font, and you've got a connector. Now, importantly, at the moment I've not joined these objects together, so they're all separate at the moment. So as you can see, I can pull them all apart, and we need to keep it like that just for what we're going to do. So what am I going to do? Well, if I select the S in the center here, so you can see in the outliner window brush script font S is selected. If we go over to this panel here, this is the properties panel, and if we show the main information, click this main information icon, we can see the size of this particular object, the S, and it's 8mm, 9mm, so you know it's and a 2mm thickness. So that gives you some of the dimensions. The location, Y says -6. Well, the green arrow is the Y position, and as you can see, here's the origin. We're actually 6mm down from the origin, so that's what the -6 is saying there. What I'm interested in here is the rotation. Okay, so we can rotate this object by clicking on the end number here, and as you can see, or I can drag it and change the number quickly, or I can simply type a number in, like say 90. Okay, now the X rotation, if you look, is rotating it about the X-axis, which is the red axis. Well, I don't actually want to do that, so I'm going to just set that back to 0. If I just rotate about the Z-axis now, you can see it's rotating it in a circular fashion. The Z-axis is actually going into or out of the plane that we're looking at here, so the blue is the red one, and again, that's not the one that I want to do, so I'm just going to go to View and Top View again. And I'm going to set Z back to 0. What I want to do is to rotate it about the Y-axis. Well, the Y-axis is the green axis, and if I just do it slowly by clicking on the number, you can see that the S is rotating round, and I'm going to leave it at an angle of 30. So I've rotated it about the Y-axis 30 degrees. So this just gives my pendant a different sort of appearance. So if I just go to View and Top again, and if I click on the L at the bottom, I can also rotate that one about the Y-axis by clicking on the Y here, or I can hold the left mouse button and drag it, and that will rotate it quickly. What I want to do is to rotate it in the opposite direction from the S, so I'm going to go minus direction, and I'm actually going to go to minus 30. So that's the kind of initial look that I want. Now, in the last lesson you saw that when you join two objects together, whichever is the last object selected, the other object takes on the same properties. Now, if I just go to View and Top again, if I just select the S, and note that we've rotated the S by 30 degrees, and if I hold down, I'm just going to switch on screencast keys here. So down here you should be able to see which keys I'm pressing. If I just hold down the Shift key on the keyboard, it doesn't actually show that in this instance. So I'm holding down the Shift key, and if I click on the Y and then go to Tools, Object Tools, and join the two together, something rather strange happens to the S. The shape of it's a bit odd. Certainly if you compare it with the L. The L is the natural shape that we want. The S is kind of twisted, and the reason it's twisted is because it's taken on the properties of the Y. And the Y hasn't been rotated. So we don't really want to be joining these objects like this when they're rotated. So I'm going to hold down the Control key and press Z on the keyboard. That has displayed down here, and I'm just going to do it a second time, and what that's done is that these two objects are now no longer joined. I've removed the joining and I've gone back to having an S and a Y as separate objects now. So I did join them together, but I've just unjoined them by doing Control and Z. I'll just show you that again. So if I highlight this object and holding down the Shift key and click the Y, so the two objects are highlighted, and you can see that in the outliner window. And if I go to Tools, Objects and join them together, the S object acts a little bit strange, which is not what I want it to do. So I'm going to do Control Z again and Control Z again, and that undoes the join, so the two objects are separate. So you've got to be a bit careful if you're going to use this rotate command as to how you join the objects together, and I'll show you that in a minute. Now the next thing I'm going to show you is how you can change the thickness of an object. So if we highlight the L, now to edit an object we need to go into edit mode, and we do that by pressing the Tab key on the keyboard. And when I do that, you can see these various points which I can select by clicking with the mouse, and these are called control points. Now if I drag the Y axis, you can see I can change the shape of my L. And notice also that in the center of the screen there is a circle. Now if I scroll the center mouse button, I'm just scrolling the center mouse button, notice that the movement, what moves, changes depending upon the size of the circle. The bigger the circle, the more points on the L move. This is called proportional editing. And I can move it vertically, or I can move it horizontally to create different effects to my L. And you need to be a little bit careful. You don't want to be going too far like that, because you can see the object itself is being quite severely distorted. So you do need to be careful how far you go with this. So I can modify the object by using dragging the Y or the X axis, dragging a control point. Now I'm not restricted to just using one control point. If I hold down the Shift key, I can highlight, as you can see there, 3 different control points, and I could move those again all at the same time, and you'll get a different effect depending on which direction you move it and also how big your circle is. And I'm using the center mouse scroll button to change the circle size. So you do need to be a little bit careful as to what you're doing, but you can always undo anything. If I press the Tab key to come out of edit mode, if I do Control Z, so I'm holding down the Control key and pressing Z, you'll see it returns to the original shape now. So that's one thing that I can do with these objects. I can reshape them by dragging the X and the Y axis. Another thing I can do is I can change the size of them. So if I select that control point there, if I go over to this panel, when I'm in edit mode, you'll see that there's a value here that says radius. Well, if I hold down the left mouse button and drag to the right, I'm increasing the radius value. I could do it by typing the number in. You'll see that the bottom of the L is actually changing. And it's changing the thickness and changing the shape of the object. So the default size is 1, and I can just type 1 in if I want. I can move it slowly by just clicking on the end here, and that will change the thickness of it slowly, or I can drag with the mouse. I'm holding down the left mouse button and dragging it. And as you can see there, it's just changing that control point. But again, I could hold down the Shift key and select several control points and change all of their radiuses at the same time. I'm just dragging with the mouse again, holding down the left mouse button and changing the mean radius. So I can change my appearance. So that's another way of changing the object. So I'm just going to come out of edit mode there by pressing the Tab key, and I'm just going to undo what I did there by doing Control Z. One further way in which I can change this object is, again, if I go and press the Tab key, if I select the control point at the bottom, if I press the S key on the keyboard, S will scale the control point. Now that's not having any effect in this or not very much effect in this instance, until I change the size of my circle. So you can see I can scale it, and again that changes the shape of the object, the L in this case. I'll press the tab key to come out of that, and Control Z again just to undo that. And then one final change that I can make, and this change I'm going to keep, is if I press the tab key again, if I select a control point at the bottom, now instead of pressing S for scale, this time I'm going to do an alternative scale method, so I'm going to hold down the Alt key and press S. So you can see that in the window here. Now this time you can see that it's scaling it in a different way. It's having quite a bigger effect, and it's actually changing the radius this time. Now you've got to be careful that you don't go too far with this and start getting black bits that appear here. That's going to cause problems if you try and print. So you do need to be careful how far you go with this alternate scale. And again, if I scroll the center mouse button, you'll see as I scale it affects different parts of the object. So the bigger the circle, the more of the object that it changes. So I'm going to do that, scale it up with the circle about that size. So I'm just going to click the left mouse button to confirm that. So those are all different ways in which I can change the shape of an object. So I've just made the bottom of the L thicker than the Y and the S above. Now, because we've made these rotations and these changes here, what we don't want to do is to join all these together by just using the Shift key. If we do that, what will happen is, because these two at the bottom are rotated and the Y isn't, we'll get a distorted effect as we do that. So before we join these objects together this time, what we need to do is to go to Tools, Objects, Tools, and convert them to meshes. So I convert the L to a mesh, and you see that it changes to a white colour. If I select the S, Tools, Object, Tools, and convert that to a mesh, and select the Y and go to Tools, Object, Tools, and convert that to a mesh, you'll notice they're all changing white. And finally, if I do the same thing with the connector, convert that to a mesh, so they're all meshes now. Now what we can do is, if we highlight the Y, this time I am going to hold down the Shift key. I'm going to select the S, select the Y, and select the connector. So I've selected all 4 items here. Now the thickness of all of these is the same. You do need to make sure that you've got the thickness the same before you change them to meshes. But what I can do now is to go to Tools, Object Tools, and join them all together. So we've just got one name in here now, and notice we've got a triangle here. That triangle indicates that this whole object is now a mesh, and I can just confirm by just moving the X-axis or the Y-axis that the whole object is joined together. So I've got my YSL pendant, but this time my S is rotated and my L is rotated, and my L's got a different thickness at the bottom. Okay, so that's the some modifications that you could make to the YSL pendant. Now at this point what you've got to do is to save this in a printable format, and the way we do that is we don't go to File and Save, we go to File and Export, and we export it as a wavefront object, and I like to do it to the desktop, and I'm going to call it Brush Script Font YSL Rotated, just to indicate that it's different from the previous exercise. So you export that object to the desktop, and that's the file that you would, well, we need to do some repairs to it before we send it to the printer, but that's essentially the printable file. Okay, so what we looked at in this particular lesson is making some rotations and some alternative scaling to the objects that make up the YSL pendant. So instead of having the YSL pendant like this, all the same thickness and all flat, we've rotated the S, rotated the L, and made it thicker at the bottom. Thank you.